I want to thank everyone for joining us. Personally, this has been a tough month for me, but being in this space and doing this is very exciting, especially, of course, it being Black History Month. So again, thank you all for joining and really just being a part of us today as we really speak on some beautiful things today. The meeting objectives for today is to discuss how racial inequity or inequality contributes to homelessness, dismantle the stigma regarding homelessness, and address the effects of the current social climate has on Blacks in the workplace. For our introductions to the panel, we have Tanisha Saunders. Tanisha works for a Safe Place for Youth as a live-in resident coordinator for the Roots to Grow transitional housing program. She is a passionate advocate who is guided by curiosity and a desire to empower others to be the change they wish to see in their community. She has overcome many facets of adversity, such as foster care, homelessness, and gun violence. She is dedicated to using her voice to bring about change in her community and throughout social services systems. She has experience working as a community organizer with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, National Foster Youth Institute, and Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools. Tanisha has also completed public policy fellowships in of Los Angeles City Councilwoman Nuri Martinez and the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority, with a focus on efforts to end homelessness. She used her lived experience to support youth experiencing homelessness. We have Charles. Charles has been an outreach worker at SPY for 2 years and has also done multiple internships to SPY and partners. He has experience navigating multiple systems, including foster care, juvenile justice, mental health, and the prison system. He has a mixed ethnic background, which brings a unique perspective to interracial relations. As a former member of the Venice Neighborhood Council, he has a very strong connection to the community that we serve. Martel Kanji, activist and father at night, service worker, trainer, and educator by day. Martel Kanji has spent his life navigating his Blackness, sexuality, and class, both in the workplace and community. His education is interdisciplinary as his identity with schools of thought from sociology, queer studies, education, and currently obtaining his doctorate in leadership and change at Antioch University, focusing on the phenomenon of race identity in the workplace. Martel Kanji brings over 15 years of experience in advocacy and best practices to serve systems involve youth through intersectional lens. He is currently an adjunct professor at Antioch University, director of innovation at Safe Place for Youth, co-chair of Service Area 5, and the founder of Go Lead, Educate, Empower, and Develop. Black excellence is among us, people. Welcome, you guys. Thank you. Myself, I am Brandon Baker. I work here at SPY as a youth empowerment, development, and advocacy program coordinator. I don't have as much background as people, but I really just love this work, and really that's who I am, is helping the youth. I also have experience with homelessness, and really trying to navigate Los Angeles without gangs and without drugs and without violence and everything that I've been through without actually dealing with it. So I was able to use experiences of others to navigate my waters and learn, like, I'm not gonna go this way because I see someone else do it. Growing up in our environment, the only people that helped us was our youth. Without my friends, I probably wouldn't be here today. And this is why I love helping the youth. The future is in their hands, so we must educate them. So those are the introductions, and now we pass it to Tanisha for an announcement she has, and also a moment of silence following. Thank you, Tanisha.
Thank you. I am honored to be here among these amazing panelists, honored to work with them. And I wanted to share and uplift the life of Daley Barnwell Moore, who passed away recently due to COVID. And I wanted to share and uplift his legacy and his life. And I'm thankful to have this space to do that. Daley Barnwell Moore was a former foster child who was adopted at 11, and he moved to Los Angeles from Baltimore in 2013 at the age of 23. And after a housing opportunity fell through when he made it to Los Angeles, he lived in hotels until he could no longer afford it. And it was really hard for him because he was displaced in a foreign place. He was from Baltimore and Los Angeles. and he was able to find shelter at the Covenant House, California, where he worked several part-time jobs to save money, but was forced to spend that money, unfortunately, when his biological mother passed away. And he had to spend his money to purchase a plane ticket to return home to bury his mother. And when he returned to Los Angeles, several months after, he was able to obtain an apartment through transitional housing. During this time, he also began his social transition from female to male. So as you can imagine, all those different layers of experiences greatly impacted him. And Daley was passionate about using his background as a foster child, a Black person with lived experience with homelessness and gender transition, to work with young people seeking to turn their lives around and uplift their voices. And that is exactly the legacy that he leaves behind. He has worked for the Youth Coordinated Entry System at the Children's Hospital. He's co-facilitated programs uplifting youth voices, voices of those with lived experience, such as the Brave Leaders Uniting to Strengthen Our Health, working with transgender and gender nonconforming youth on STD and HIV prevention, and was a sitting member of the National Forum on Ending Youth Homelessness. I had the pleasure of meeting Daley in spring 2018, where we were on a trip with about 120 other current and former foster youth who were heading to DC to meet with our congressional representatives to advocate for foster youth. Um, and the transformation of the child welfare system as a whole. And we connected and we bonded. We were in the same group. I was actually the leader of the group, but it was a leaderful experience, and I was honored to meet him. And during this time, Daley worked for LASA as the Homeless Youth Forum Los Angeles coordinator. And after that experience, he called me up and let me know that there was the opportunity for me to advocate on a panel, because LASA had established an ad hoc committee on Black people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles. And he let me know there was an opportunity for me to come share my experiences and my intersectional identities as a former foster child and someone who also experienced homelessness. And it was through that experience that I not only shared my experience, but shared my curiosity for the understanding of how policy worked. I wanted to uplift the policies that existed and wanted to learn how policy creation worked and different things like that. And that led to me actually having a fellowship at LASA, where I was able to continue working alongside Daley and HIFLA, uplifting the voices of those with lived experiences, but also working on this ad hoc committee report on Black people experiencing homelessness. And the committee examined the institutional barriers facing Black people in various upstream and mainstream systems, including housing, labor, the criminal justice system, education, basically all these funnels that lead to the pipeline of homelessness. And it was an honor for me to work with Daley and call him a friend. He was a courageous advocate working to end youth homelessness. He lived in his truth and utilized his intersectional experiences to advocate for and uplift the voices of youth impacted by it. Rest in peace, Daley. Thank you all. Oh, and if we could lead into a moment of silence. I think we naturally just did that, but let's lead into a moment of silence for Daley.
Tanisha, thank you so much. Martell, Charles, thank you for being here and all the work that you do. Seriously, it's amazing work that you guys do, and always I'm inspired. So that's going to transition us into this next that I have for you guys, which is a Black History presentation. We'll be sharing my screen now. Can everyone see? Good. Okay. 2021 Black History Month. As always, it's right we acknowledge our iconic Black figures, and this month we are doing so by paying homage to our unsung Black heroes. Unsung Black heroes. They are African American pioneers who may not get the publicity and fame, but were and are just as important and influential. There's so many Black pioneers that need to be conversation, so we encourage you to dive deeper into Black excellence. Doing so would allow you to bring more names to the table and grow everyone's knowledge of Black history. It's time we bring them into the house of Black excellence. Let's begin. So for me personally, I was never taught the foundation of Black History Month. In school, it was always like, it's February, this is Black History Month, this is the few people you need to know, and that's that. I've never really learned, like I said, the foundation of it. So I'm going to start back with Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson is the father of Black History Month. In 1926, Woodson created the first Negro History Week, which was held during the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist who himself escaped from slavery, and former President Abraham Lincoln. In the 1960s, the focus on Black identity provided fertile ground for Negro History Week to grow into Black History Month. In 1976, during the United States Bicentennial celebration, President Gerald Ford recognized February as Black History Month and encouraged Americans to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. Sadie Alexander, Sadie Alexander, sorry, a writer, a native Philadelphian, Alexander was the first Black woman to receive a PhD in economics in the United States, the first Black woman to graduate with a law degree from Penn Law School, and the first African American woman to practice law in Pennsylvania. Her quote, "I knew well that the only way I could get that door open was to knock it down, because I knocked all of them down. Black queens, please continue to take over." Shirley Chisholm, New York State Assembly. Congress is more diverse now than it's ever been. However, when Chisholm was attempting to shatter the glass ceiling, the same couldn't be said. During a racially contentious period in the late 60s, she became the first Black woman elected to Congress. She represented New York's 12th district from 1969 to 1983, and in 1972, she became the first woman to run for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. Her campaign slogan, "Unbought and Unbossed," rings even louder today. Michelle and Kamala, they see you. Bessie Coleman, American aviator. Despite being the first licensed Black pilot in the world, Coleman wasn't recognized as a pioneer in aviation until after her death. Though history has favored Amelia Earhart or the Wright brothers, Coleman, who went to flight school in France in 1919, paved the way for a new generation of diverse flyers like the Tuskegee Airmen, Blackbirds, and Flying Hobos. Biddy Mason, this one was brought to the table from our own Tanisha Saunders. I'm honestly upset that I did not know Biddy Mason, especially I am a local and LA native. So this one was a pleasure. Thank you, Tanisha. Biddy Mason, California real estate entrepreneur and philanthropist. Biddy Mason was a Southern slave who became free after she moved with her masters to California. She built a career in Los Angeles as a nurse and a midwife, bought a piece of property, and used her business skills to become one of the wealthiest Black women in the United States after the Civil War, as well as notable philanthropist. Biddy founded the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in Los Angeles in 1872. Marsha Payne No Mind Johnson. Marsha Payne No Mind Johnson was a Black trans woman who was a force behind the Stonewall riots and surrounding activism that sparked a new phase of LGBTQ plus movement in 1969. Along with Sylvia Rivera, she established the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, also known as STAR, in 1970, a group committed to supporting transgender youth experiencing homelessness in New York City. Marsha P. Johnson is now one of the most venerated icons in LGBTQ plus history. Has been celebrated in a series of books, documentaries, and films. Her action and words continue to inspire trans activism and resistance and will continue to do so well into the future. Mark Dean, computer scientist. Dean worked for IBM as a computer scientist. He was one of the original inventors of the IBM personal computer and the color PC monitor. He is also responsible for creating the technology that allows devices such as keyboards, mice, and printers to be plugged into a computer and communicate with each other. Dean also managed a team that created the 1 gigahertz processor chip. Dean continued to further his own education, pursuing a master's degree and eventually a doctorate from Stanford University. Technology changes the future. So basically, being Black changes the future. Jesse Brown, Navy pilot. When Jesse Leroy Brown was a teenager, he wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt to express his disappointment that African Americans weren't flying in the military. While that changed in the Air Force in the early 40s with the Tuskegee Airmen, it would be Brown himself that would break that barrier for the Navy in 1947. By 1949, he was an officer, and in 1950, the United States was at war in Korea, and he was in action. Brown and his unit were soon airborne, completing dangerous missions to take out targets and protect troops on the ground. Too Black, too strong. And this one also was brought to the table from our own Charles. Yup, Egypt is in Africa. Ancient Egypt was one of the greatest and most powerful civilizations in the history of the world. It lasted for over 3,000 years from 3150 BC to 30 BC. The civilization of ancient Egypt was located along the Nile River in northeast Africa. The Nile provided food, soil, water, and transportation for the Egyptians. The achievements of the civilization involved innovations in writing, hieroglyphics and demotic, and administration and quarrying, which is extracting minerals from the ground to produce materials for construction and surveying, maths and architecture, and irrigation and agricultural methods, as well as developing some of the earliest ships. The civilization of Nubia lay in today's Sudan, south of Egypt. Much is known about Egyptian civilization, but few people know about a civilization that ruled Egypt for as many as 100 years. The Black race pharaohs in Egyptian history were actually Nubian or Sudanese kings and queens. So now you know if you're called a Nubian king or queen, where that comes from. So again, we ask you to dive deeper into Black excellence and Black history so that more of our brothers and sisters can receive the glory and shine they deserve. Remember, Black is bold, Black is beautiful, Black is excellence. We need to be relevant 365 days of the year. So for that presentation, thank you guys. And now we are moving towards the discussion with the panel. So first question, Tanisha, will you please start us off? Tell us your name, pronouns, role in homelessness, and which historical Black figure you get motivation from.
My name is Tanisha Saunders. I go by she, her pronouns. A historical Black figure that I get motivation from would be Ida B. Wells. She was fearless in her pursuit to expose um, the horrific lynchings that were going on throughout the nation, which we're still seeing. I know it goes by a different name, but I get motivation from her to just live in my truth, share the truths of our society, even if they may be harsh. But yeah, Ida B. Wells.
Charles.
Yes, my name is Charles Riles, he, him, his. I'm an outreach peer navigator at Safe Place for Youth. And yeah, I mean, I have experience in homelessness, like being homeless. So yeah, that's my homelessness take. But I think for my Black historical figure, I'm gonna go with Cleopatra, the pharaoh, because when you think back on that, like, you know, we think of our time like the way that we progress over time as like linear, and we're just like kind of going up gradually, but in reality we're not. You know, we've went up and down, and the fact that they could have a female pharaoh back then, the person who is all powerful, who makes all the decisions, you know what I'm saying? And a society that could see that men and women were equal back in a time where we were supposed to be savages and stuff like that. And it was taking place in Egypt, you know, in Africa. So it's like, I think that's really inspirational to me. So I'm gonna ride with Cleopatra.
For sure.
Guess that means that's me. Martello Kanji, all-inclusive pronouns. I'm definitely gonna have to say Bayard Rustin. When we think of, you know, the civil rights movement, a gay Black man not being included in his voice in that movement, working alongside Martin Luther King, and that entire, like, the man behind the scenes. So yeah, I'm always trying to see, how do I get behind the scenes and disrupt spaces and do some good trouble. That's Bayard Rustin, and that's my motivation to say, like, I don't need you to know who I am. I just need you to know that things need to change.
Got you. All great historical Black figures. Charles, we're gonna start you off with the next question. So terms such as gentrification and displacement are now being used much more to promote the upgrades of communities, but also seemingly erase Black communities. When you hear the term gentrification, what comes to your mind?
Ooh, so I mean, just kind of like the first thing flash in my mind, which is kind of, you know, exaggerated, but it's final solution, right? Like it's not that drastic, obviously, but like that's just kind of what comes to mind, because I feel like you have this group of people who do certain things and set things up a certain way, and then they're like, oh, you know what? Actually, we don't want them over there. That's some valuable property. We're gonna take that. It's like, you know, instead of fixing the actual problem, you just put in like a band-aid on it and moving people around, which is the same as homelessness. The homelessness problem in LA, whether you're Black, white, brown, doesn't matter. You know what I mean? They don't want to actually get you off the street. They just want to bounce you around and just like, oh, I don't want you in front of my house. You're go get in front of someone else's house, and then they're gonna be like, oh, I don't want you in front of my house. Go back over there. Like, you know, so it's just like that's pretty much what they're doing with Black people too. You know, I feel like our history and our struggle is a template for how they've been treating homeless people. You know, and because I was talking about this, like, you have these systems set in place against everyone that's not these people, right? Who I don't really need to name, but like, if you're not this, then the system's not set up for you, and we consider that to be racist, right? And then all of these things start happening, and then you're like, oh, okay, they don't care about race anymore. It's just about economic value and all of this. Like, oh, it's just about money. If you're Black and you're rich, then, you know, no one discriminates against you. But you have to think about the root of that system, which was set up as a racist system, right? And now it's trickled down into the economy. Now you have a disproportionate amount of people of color being homeless versus people, well, like white people. You know what I'm saying? That shit, it affects each other. You know, you have to factor in all of that. So yeah, that's what comes to my mind is like final solution. It seems like this huge scheme that like I don't think anyone's intentionally just mapped it out and was like, oh, we're gonna do this. But it feels very deep. You know, it feels very like conspiratorial, if that's a word. But you know what I'm saying? So, but yeah.
Martel?
Yeah, if you can do me a favor, just repeat the question one more time for me, please.
Terms such as gentrification and displacement are now being used much more to promote the upgrades of communities, but also seemingly erase Black communities. When you hear the gentrification, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, I think of like redlining. I think of like that lack of access to education, and how we really talk about that prison to pipeline to prison. I think of all those different systems that contributed to, okay, well, we're all going to move into this area because now we're not liking what this looks like, or now they just opened up, like what's happening in Inglewood, right? We talk about that stadium being built and how we just looked at a house that was like $975,000 for a 2-bedroom, and I was just like, wait, what? How did that even Inglewood? What just happened here? So I'm just like, those are the things I think about, like how we're in a system creating homelessness, we're creating disparities. To me, I thought when we talk about improving, you know, communities, that we're actually going in, we're creating more resources, whether that looks like we're painting buildings, whether that looks like we're removing vacant buildings that no longer exist and replacing those with something much more needed in the community, and not necessarily fixing that and then increasing the rent and then increasing the prices of food, or putting in things that aren't culturally relevant to that community. So yeah, so I think, you know, when I hear the word gentrification, I think of, okay, when is Whole Foods coming in to not even hire the folks who live in the community, who live around those communities? And there's so many things that come to my mind. And I'm just like, okay, how do we actually get ahead of gentrification? And how do we start being able to develop our communities? But then also noticing once we develop those communities, folks are going to drive by and be like, oh, I want to live here now, and I'm going to increase this, or I'm going to toss this house and turn it over, and then increase the amount that it needs to be sold for. And I know there's folks who do that, and people are like, oh, I'll own like 4 houses. I'm like, why? Why do you need 4 houses? For what purpose? If you're like, oh, well, I have this house and this house, but I rent out this house, and I'm just like, that house. So, you know, for me, it's almost like an alarm that gets sound when I hear gentrification, and I'm just like, okay, so we're just going to continue to keep me employed in this field, whereas I'm trying to really like not be employed in this field anymore. I don't want it to exist. I would rather us do more preventative work where we're really talking about community restoration and healing when we're still actually talking about the steps before that. So yeah, for me, I really, that's kind of what goes off in my head.
Thank you, Martell. Tanisha?
They took all my answers. When I hear gentrification, I'm so thankful that this word exists, because I think for the longest time, we were talking about gentrification in terms of development. And so it was pretty hard for folks who live in these communities. I'm personally from Compton, and who grew up in these communities to now see this interest and investment in these communities. And we're not against development opportunities and resources coming to these communities, but I think it's just important with gentrification, when I hear and what I know it to be is displacement of the poor for profit. So just understanding the historical context, referring back to what Martell said about redlining, which was government sanctioned discrimination, the government working with banks to say, you know what, these areas over here, we're going to carve them out and we won't offer them loans. When you looked at those specific areas, what were those hoods? What was the ghetto is who were living there. It was Black people. So the government sponsored, you know, suburbs, sponsored families, you know, uplifting them and giving them opportunities for home ownership while Black people were excluded. So now these same historically redlined communities are now ripe for the picking, because you have these communities where home ownership isn't thriving because these people who live here have not been able to have that access at the same as their neighbors, as their counterparts. And so for me, I think it's violence. I hear gentrification and I hear violence. I hear police. I'll share a little bit about my story. I kind of skipped over that first part of the question where you said, what is my role in homelessness? I work at Safe Place for Youth as a live-in resident coordinator. So I live with the youth as we're working to support them transitioning into permanent housing or their next housing opportunity. And I have that lived experience with homelessness as well as with foster care. And so again, to what Martell was saying, as we're talking about pipelines to the birth to prison pipeline, along that pipeline is to homelessness. And so one of the experiences I remember to this day was I was a college student and had some family issues and just realized I couldn't live in that toxic environment. So I decided to live in my car while I was going to college. In my community, I couldn't find resources in Compton where I grew up, resources in the community that I know to be home. So one of the things I found myself doing was driving to my old high school. I don't know what I was doing. I was just driving around. Luckily, I had gas. My high school was in Lawndale, California. And I was just looking for a place to park and sleep for the night. I saw a park, I saw a neighborhood. It looked pretty decent. I parked in that neighborhood. And as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a knock on my window, and I woke up to 3 police officers at my window, and 3 squad cars. You know, imagine that. You're homeless, you're experiencing adversity, and you're scared, and you get woken up by the police. They asked me what I was doing there. They told me that I had to leave, and I asked them for resources. I asked them if they knew of a place that I could go to. The response was, no, you just can't be here. So when I hear gentrification, I hear police presence, I hear crime, violence, I hear all that being placed down onto people in these communities that have been historically divested from. And now there's a stake in these communities. Now, oh, you're close to these freeways that have been poisoning you and poisoning your children and giving you asthma disproportionately. So let's clean up the air. Let's make sure we have this area and clean it up and get access to better quality healthcare. But oh, this isn't intended for you. This is intended for those folks who ideally want to live here, to be closer to the freeway so they can be closer to the airport, so they can have closer access. Mind you, these are folks who are coming from the suburbs, which the government created, which, you know, to support folks who were fleeing communities where Black people were having access to. So I think when we talk about gentrification, it's important to look at the historical context. It's important for us to know that these may be new terms that we're familiar with, but these are terms to better understand these systems that have historically been in place, and to understand that we just didn't arrive. These times just didn't happen within the last 10 years. This has been systemically happening over time. Let me get off my soapbox.
Nah, you good. You definitely are good. But really though, with gentrification, is like, are you developing it for us or for them? You know, that's really the question is like, are you developing it for our communities to be better, or to extract who's in there and put in more people to where there's no point of even using the term development, you know, because they're already situated in life. So yeah, like you guys all said, is definitely a scary and eye-opening word whenever you hear you see it in the Starbucks on the corner. You're like, here it go. So next question, we're gonna start off with Martell. What stigmas have been attached to homelessness, and how can we change the narratives around these stigmas?
You know, that's one of those loaded questions that even in my communities I hear, and I'm just like, did y'all forget I was homeless? Like, what? Like, where do you even get that from? Like, how does that happen? So I know, like, one of the biggest ones that I hear is like, you know, folks just want to be homeless, and that's just it. And I think that's such a troublesome like term, you know, even for me. So a part of the things that I do is like as a professor at Antioch University, I teach a lot of our teachers, and we really talk about neuroscience and how do we learn and how do we develop. And we talk about this concept of like learned helplessness. And really recognizing that if someone is constantly in the same situation, constantly having to go through homelessness, and finding out every time, as Tanisha just shared in a beautiful example, bittersweet, of course, that when you go into an environment and someone says, I don't have the resources for you, I don't know what to tell you, and you keep hearing that, or you try to go for that next housing appointment and someone's like, there's no housing available, you start to just get over it. You start to feel like, okay, well, then nothing's ever going to work for me. Like this is the end of my past. So it's like, it's not even about wanting to be homeless. It's about, we don't even have enough beds to support our homeless. So it's like, when folks are saying these types of stigmas, I'm just like, yo, like, you know, when I was experiencing homelessness, like the biggest thing was like, okay, how many people do I know? You know, parts of me felt like I became a socialite. So if I knew so many different people, I would never have to worry about sleeping on someone's floor the same day at the time. Like I literally, okay, I'm gonna sleep at your house. I'm gonna sleep at your house. I'm gonna sleep at your house. And like everyone's like, you know, so many people. I'm like, yeah, and I always will have a place to sleep. Or at least, you know, most of the time until the holidays came around. And I'm like, damn, I hate the fucking holidays. Like the holidays I hate because everyone goes with their family and I'm sitting here just like, now where am I gonna sleep? Unfortunately, you know, there's folks who are like, hey, Martell, come with my family. Come be with my family. But I also hate that whole family concept because I'm like, I don't want to be all cheery because I want to have my own place to sleep. So it's like just that being like one of the big stigmas that also sit with me, and just the sense of like, nobody wants to have to figure out what to do every single day, or be in survival mode, or have to figure out why is it important that I need to even meet with a case manager just to talk about a housing program. Who's going to tell me there's no housing available? So it's just like, I think one of the things that we really need to start motivating folks to understand is like, folks are experiencing homelessness, like it's a real issue. And if you think someone's gonna walk in and be excited about doing any of this work, knowing that this work leads to, and I mean the individual who's going through the homelessness, doing the work to get housing against a system that is not allowing them to get housing, that it's tiring, it's exhausting. So like just understanding that simple concept there, like, no, we got to change that narrative and just saying like, well, you know, maybe people are just like, I'm just going to sleep here today because I'm tired of always having to walk to the county office or to this organization today. So yeah, I think that's definitely one of the stigmas that I'm like, we got to change the narrative around that.
Tanisha?
Martell keeps taking my answers. I agree. I think the biggest thing for me is the bootstrap theory. That is that if you work hard enough, if you attain next level of education, you will work your way out of homelessness. And while that may be true for some, I think it's just important to realize the historical context again and these pipelines. Like we're able to name these pipelines from the school to prison pipeline to the foster care to prison pipeline. We're able to talk about these pipelines more, but who's talking about shutting off the water source? Who's talking about going to these foundations and really transforming them? And I know in Los Angeles, there actually is some work being done around police brutality, around our education systems and defunding the police to reroute these funds. Because if you follow the money, we're spending so much money to criminalize our people, to punish our people, and not to invest in these same people. Understanding that, you know, resources are what we need from the jump. So work hard and you will get ahead. It's just not a reality when you look at the disproportionate rates that Black people experience homelessness. We're 8% of those in Los Angeles, but represent 40% of those experiencing homelessness. And so I think we just have to combat these narratives, we have to be honest about the historical factors that lead into these realities, but also working on equitable solutions and really attacking these realities that people face, and really cut off the source to these pipelines. So how are we reinvesting funds or divesting funds from systems of harm and investing them into our education, investing them into strengthening families, investing them into communities, investing them into education, into employment opportunities. So it's not enough to say, get a job. Well, if the jobs we're offering, are you getting paid minimum wage, but a 1-bedroom apartment is $1,400, and that's in a questionable. I look at Zillow every day. I think it's just important. I use that as motivation, but I also uplift my own personal story. I am a live-in resident coordinator. I am from Compton, California. The only way I was able to come back and work in this community and do something I'm passionate about is with the opportunity to have housing. I'm working alongside youth who are transitioning out of homelessness, and I am walking alongside them. I am on this journey as well. It's not enough that I am educated. It's not enough that I am a good person. It's not enough that I have strong work ethic. It's not enough in this reality that we're facing. So I think if we want to combat these narratives, we have to be real about our solutions and real about the whole picture of these narratives and really addressing these disparities where they are, and also not leaning on people experiencing homelessness to continuously tell our stories or to lead this work when it's like, well, Google is free. A lot of times we're looking like, okay, how did we get to 2021? Like, oh, this is what racism is. And it's like, well, we are at the worst points of disparities. You know, a lot of people think looking at Black and white pictures, oh, it doesn't look the same as it did back then. We're talking about slavery in the United States. Our population is 4% of the world population, but we hold 25% of those who are incarcerated in the entire world. We are still investing in these systems of oppression, and we have to get real about these narratives, real about how things really haven't changed that much, or these systems that are pushing people into homelessness, into incarceration, and into death. And I think the real way to change these narratives is to change how we're doing the work.
Thank you. Charles.
Pass. No, I'm just kidding. Both of y'all Both of y'all just took every answer I could possibly say. I ain't gonna hold it against you. It's fine. Maybe I'll be able to bring some type of unique perspective to it, but I'm gonna say the same thing, which is a stigma that I hear a lot, which is they don't want to work. They don't want to work. And then I think, and I'm just like, oh, like that's such an ignorant thing to say, right? Because you think about it, like you talk about pipelines and all that stuff, and that kind of gets fancy, and then you're just like, whoa, where are we at? But like, think about it in practical terms. Like, you know, I was a youth. I was under the age of 18. I committed a crime that a lot of people got a slap on the wrist for, but I got convicted and charged as an adult. First felony on my record right there. Boom. So once you have that F on your record, you got an F. That's it. And there are jobs you can get, but it's like if there was 100 jobs, you qualify for maybe 2 or 3 of them now. See what I'm saying? And though out of those 2 or 3, they're minimum wage. They're gonna be like, you're gonna have a boss that's in your face, breathing down your neck. So if you're an alpha, that ain't gonna work. If you're an alpha male, you're not gonna be able to work in a situation like that. You got to start your own business. You got to do something. You got to be a handyman. You got to do some type of, and some people find that, but then there's intersectionality that you got to bring in too, because we all got different identities that create different barriers to what we're trying to do. So then, you know, homeboy might not have been able to be a welder or whatever, for whatever reason. And then they're just stuck right there. You're like, okay, I need money for my family because everyone needs money. We're slaves to money. That's what we are. We're slaves to money. And then they do things like supply and demand. You know, the same thing a pharmacy does. Well, they'll go sell drugs to people who aren't getting high because they're criminals, are getting high because they have a terrible freaking life and they need to numb that pain. They're self-medicating. And you have these other people who fall into this life of crime, so to speak. And now you're just stuck in this vicious cycle where like only way I can make enough money to actually pay rent unless I'm on Section 8 is to do something illegal. And the only reason it's illegal is because I'm doing it. You know, because if white people were doing it, like, it'd be fine. Actually, white people are doing it and it is fine. You know what I'm saying? They'll sell you the cure to AIDS if you got $1 million, but if you ain't got nothing, you ain't gonna get it. So it's like, you know, what's really going on here? And then, I just think about that and I'm like, you know, these same people that are saying they don't want to work, maybe you should step back and look at your job. And not just look at your job, look at how you got your job. And you said, oh, I went to school. How did you get in school? How did you pay for school? Oh, I got a loan. Oh, you got a loan. Must be nice. You know what I'm saying? Like, did your mom push you on to go to college? Like, was there a father figure there who kind of told you the importance of going to college? Was there, you know, adequate, fucking access to that? If there wasn't, then you wouldn't have been there. You would not have that job. Okay, let's say you got that job. You say, okay, you get laid off. You're gonna go start washing dishes for $7 an hour, having them yelling at you and calling you all type of fucking names in the back and shit. And if you say something back, then you're out because you're so replaceable, it doesn't matter. Hell no, you're not. And the crazy part is a lot of Black people, a lot of people on the streets, a lot of people who are almost about to be on the streets have work jobs like that. And that shit is commendable. We're like, man, you worked there for 3 months? Damn. You did that for 3 months? Like, that's commendable. Like, bro, like, the average person couldn't do that. Just like the average person who has a house in Venice wouldn't go live at a shelter in Pasadena. That's what I'm trying to tell them. I'm like, they're people too. They're just like you. They're you on the street. So you telling us to build a shelter in Pasadena is stupid because they're just going to come right back over here just like you would. You know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to add, Charles, you said something that was really powerful too, in the sense of like where you're starting from, like who's motivating you, who's allowing you to explore who you are and like what options you have in the future, right? And I always say this, it's so vitally important, right? We are, in a sense, even as like the social workers within this space, the service workers within this space, however we want to name and claim that, like, as the folks who are running the programs or the folks who are either providing or facilitating it, we're going to be the ones who are going to have the conversations on like, where do you see yourself? Like, and if we're not doing that, we're also not doing that part of providing them the full opportunities to see past all the barriers, all the lack of accesses that they also have, right? Like when I was experiencing homelessness, like I was fortunate to have been to like I started at a suburban school where they were like, we're going to talk about everything. Although we can name the challenges when they saw me, and we're just like, oh, well, actually we can tokenize him and he can be our playboy into the diversity sector. But I know when I saw my colleagues and, you know, we talk about that ABC track in education that, you know, not a lot of folks talk about unless you work in education, where we're like, these folks are going to be our frontline workers. We're going to make accelerated programs within the same school system, within the same environment that all of our accelerated folks will go to. And I'm sitting here like, whatever. So I digress, but I say in that same sense, like working in this space, if we're not having the conversations to let folks know, like, what we even offer when they walk into the space to say like, yo, like we talk about education and employment. You might not be ready for that here today, but just like, you know, I'm talking to my daughter about her education and what she might be seeing herself. And she's only 4. She's 4 years old and we're already having those conversations. Folks don't get to have those conversations when they come in here because it's always about your trauma. We're going to focus on your trauma. And I'm like, we got to do more than that. And I feel like, especially being Black and recognizing like the disparities amongst my own culture from the systems that exist within that, like if we're not also cultivating that language with our folks that are walking into this space, they're never going to hear it. And folks are never going to pay attention to it. So I'm always like, yeah, just as Charles says, like folks have already been in those environments talking to people about where they want to go and what they want to be, and that they're accessible to even think about college. Where I'm sitting here on the other end, like, folks, we don't talk about that and we don't look at that. It's always, you made it to 18. All right, cool. Now you got to do what you got to do and pull it up to yourself. And like, that's usually the conversation that happens. So I'm always like, nah, we're going to talk further and even do more on that aspect. So like, that's also another stigma that I'm always like, we don't get access to those conversations. And that's something that we need to start doing as agencies, providers, period.
Yeah, you know, with everything you guys said, all powerful answers. I really can't have anything else to say, but start telling people to not use the homelessness and homeless people as scare tactics to develop the youth. And what I mean by that is when you're growing up, you're being told, if you don't do your homework, you're going to end up like that person on the street. If you don't listen to me, you're going to end up like that person on the street, you know, and providing these scare tactics that already divide and disconnect at a young age. So now when you get to 18, you're already putting yourself above the people that are just human, like you guys have said, and like Charles mentioned, like they're the same as you. But your whole life, have used motivation to get, you know, to achieve a success out of you by putting other people down and already providing that disconnect. So now when you're their age, you're like, nah, I can talk to you, like, but let alone shit, these people have degrees and get homeless. Like, you know, like Charles said, and all you guys said, it's like they don't want to go to work. Like these people can have jobs and go to work. These people can be the smartest people on earth and they just say, you know what? I'm done with society. I'm like, you know, so using scare tactics to using homelessness and homeless people as scare tactics to develop the youth, create this connect of in years of, you know, that disconnect to where by the time they get of age to even realize it, they're so far disconnected that you can't even bring them back to the table because they've already planted in their heads that, you know, we are not the same. So man, we can go to the next question on that note. Charles, starting with you. Our current social climate has been centered on social injustices, police brutality, unlawful killings, racial biases towards Blacks. How has this impacted your work service provider, especially working within homelessness?
Oh man, you know what? I think I'm gonna pass this one on to Tanisha because that's a loaded question. I need some thinking. I need to do some thinking.
You could tell I got notes over here, huh? I'm like,
Look, you got notes over here.
okay, and let me see. I think it is a very loaded question. It's hard. It's hard to answer that and operate within our reality. And I think this word current is just what it's triggering me because, you know, I've grown into this, I've lived these experiences, and then, you know, growing up for most of my life, I've been taught, you know, a lot of Black history or a lot of the way I think is a conspiracy. It's based off conspiracy because a lot of our traditions and a lot of things we know, something as small as don't have the light on in your car while you're driving. It's not illegal to do that, but Black people, we learn you can't have your light on in the car because you also don't want people to see, you Black while you driving. Or when you get pulled over, you got to have your 10 and twos because, you can't move a certain way. These are things that have been passed down to us.
Wait, you telling me it's not illegal to drive with the light on?
And like when you're driving in that little light, if you have it on, it's not illegal. If you have your phone out.
I swear, look, that is so funny that you say that
because we internalize that.
In my car and you turn my light on while I'm driving, I'm a freak out. Like, what is you doing? You trying to get pulled over?
And those things go back to, like Black people not being able to travel throughout the United States. And, we had to develop green books so we knew safe places to stop while we were on the road in the 50s and 60s because, we were targeted. And again, it goes back to policing and the history of policing being slave patrol. And again, when I told y'all earlier, we represent 4% of the world population, but 25% of those who are imprisoned in the world are in the United States. And it's a part of our reality. So I just went off on a tangent because we talk about current, but it's like these situations that we're seeing aren't current, but I think they're blasted because we're in a pandemic and we are relying heavily on social media. And so a lot of information is being passed through social media. It's very traumatizing to me. I saw there was a Black teen in Texas who was walking home from work at Walmart. He was in shorts and the police, stopped him to do a wellness check. They asked him, "Hey, where are you going? We gotta check in with you. We don't know if everything's okay." And he said, "I'm okay. I'm walking home. Let me go home." "Oh, well, let us take you home. Get in the car." No, mind you, this young man is in shorts in Texas while Texas faced historical, freezing temperatures, but is not willing to get in the car with a police officer. So then they take him in and charge him, and we're able to see these things over and over on social media. But for me, it's very hard. I have to do a check-in with myself daily because I do work with Black youth experiencing homelessness. I am a Black person experiencing homelessness. So I have to be mindful of how I navigate this work and how I show up because it is difficult. We're talking about systems and barriers, and then we're at the same time working with youth to help them navigate out of their experiences of homelessness, but then we don't have creative solutions that address their cultural experiences, creative solutions that highlight their own entrepreneurship. Like youth experiencing homelessness, we are some of the most resilient. We know how to survive. They know how to survive. They are smart. They know how to navigate these systems. And then for us to not cater to their needs, not cater to their diverse cultural experiences, not uplift their talents, not uplift their strengths, and provide opportunities for them to have pathways to personal entrepreneurship, have pathways to have ownership of their name, of their brand. I think that does a great disservice. And I think for me, I enjoy working at Safe Place for Youth because there's so many opportunities for innovation, but those are just some of the things that I'm seeing when I'm working with youth. And then going back to the original question around the cultural climate, I just again have to throw COVID in there because we are dealing with a time where these youth who are street-based, who know how to navigate their communities, navigate their social settings, have for the past year have been cut off from a lot of those social settings, have been cut off from a lot of those social networks. And then, they're looking at social media and then they're looking at things coming out about COVID and they're skeptical because they feel shut off from a lot of their resources. So for me, I think these current times of social injustice while living in a pandemic is just really difficult to navigate. But one of the things that I think has been helpful is leaving space for the youth to share their story and to share their opinion. It's not about what's right or wrong. It's about allowing them that space to express themselves. I am not a counselor. I am not a therapist, but I think it's also hard to navigate society while we see these truths being played out in front of us. to this day, I drive with 10 to 2. To this day, I won't turn on the light. To this day, my first instinct is not to call 911. And I think it greatly impacts how we show up in this work, how we show up for our youth, and how we work to end homelessness. So I think, yeah. Charles, did you find your answer?
If you
Tell. It's like Clark.
For that U-turn. First off, yes, loaded question, right? When we talk about the social climate, when we talk about police brutality, when we talk about all the things that's happening, and then us as social service workers working in this field, having experienced homelessness, having experienced police brutality, like folks don't know, I've been pulled over 4 times. One time I got out of surgery. I even had my catheter and my bag on my leg. The officer made me get off the car. He literally, like 2 police cars blocked the intersection and made me get out of the car. All of this because I had the license plate light. I have 2 little lights on that shine on the license plate. One of them was out. All of that. Blocked the intersections, pulled me out the car, asked me where I was going, who was I traveling with, because I had my friend in the back seat. I had a white boy, and it was me and a black boy and a Hispanic boy in the front. And they was like, what the hell is going on? And, I think about this, and I think about, oh, by the way, we came out of class. Crazy, right? So all of our backpacks were literally on the other side of the chair. And it blows my mind when I think of even when I was experiencing homelessness. And I'll be real, we used to go to the grocery store and that's how we ate. We clearly weren't purchasing food. Like my friends were literally doing the things that we needed to do to survive. We wasn't taking more than we needed. We took enough just to eat. Like we were hungry and the grocery store had an abundance of food. So I think about this in the same sense of like, when I would go to sleep hungry as hell, when I'd be wondering who I get to talk to about all the demons that were going into my head as I'm like seriously sitting here like, is this really what my life is? Like, and growing up as a kid, like we grew up shit poor, but then my family had the opportunity to gain resources, but my sexuality brought in a completely different conversation when we talk about the Black community and just being gay. And so me having to navigate that by myself and not really being able to say like, cool, people care about me. People want to see me succeed and grow. People want to think that I deserve to be in this world. To navigate all of that and then to go back into this field, I always tell folks, I'm like, for me, I wanted to be a music producer. Like I wanted to do music. I wanted to live in music. But I was like, but my calling was much more than that. Like my calling was just like, no, Martell, like, this is what you got to do right now. Do your music on the side, have fun, do your hobbies, enjoy that. But I was like, it becomes a challenge because I know one of the things I always have to check is my bias to say like, Martell, you are not the only person who has the answer. And sometimes it's really hard for me because if I know an answer and I see someone not doing that answer, I have to say, I want to see you fail so we can talk about how you succeed. But I'm like, if this is at the expense of a young person who I know what it's like to be hungry, to not have what I need, to not be able to see a future for myself, and you are being the person blocking that, it is going to be really hard for me to not be angry with you. It is really hard, especially if I know you are not Black, especially if I know you are working with Black communities. So it's like, it's one of those things that I check on a daily because it's so hard to recognize like doing this work is not easy. It's just not easy, especially when you're coming from this community. And it hurts. It hurts daily when I see it not done right. And there is a right way to do it. I'm not saying that it's 1, 2, 3 step. What I'm saying is there's the intentionality, there's the way you reflect on it, there's the way that you strategize with it. So it becomes one of those things that I was like, I didn't dedicate myself going to school because I thought I wanted to be successful. I dedicated my school because I wanted to dismantle this and I didn't want anybody else to have to navigate this. So it's like, I'm not going in this for a paycheck. I'm not going in this to be proclaimed as this amazing activist and strategist and doing homeless work. I'm doing this because my entire community is literally being forced to experience this. And I have the privilege to have tools and skills to be able to have conversations with folks to influence them to see a better goal for all of us here. So it's hard. It's every day that you're constantly like, okay, let me put my experiences to the back burner. Let me manage my emotions. Let me go in this space. Let me critically think. Let me be able to motivate folks to do this work while also seeing my people experiencing the pain and the hardships that they're experiencing, while also having to navigate the world and the social climate that we live in, and still have my own personal goals and hopes and dreams that I have to balance out in this picture. So it's not easy. And to know that I know what it's like to be hungry, to not have a roof over my head, to sleep on the ground, and to know that people who look like me are also, to know anybody is experiencing that at that same point, and to know that folks who are LGBT, who people don't really give a shit about, experiencing that and not understanding that we also need different ways of approaching it. Because I'm like, you can call us homeless, you can call us houseless, but I was like, first off, I have a house I can go to. I don't need a house. I need a home. I'm a homeless youth. This is what I need to be successful. I don't give a damn about being in a house. I need to be in an environment that's going to promote and provide my safety and security. So it was like, those were the different ways of even having conversations for folks. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard as hell. And I am fortunate to have like the community that I have, to have the resources that I have, to have the support that I have today that really says, Martell, hey, we're going to support you to go through this work. But I could only imagine like my colleagues and my peers who are also in this work and not having those type of systems and what that looks like.
Charles, what you got for us?
Here we are again. Got to go after these two geniuses. I guess I did that to myself, but so I don't know. This is a tricky question. It's weird because you have people above you who, when you start talking about the current climate, right? And like Tanisha said, it's not current. It's like this has been going on forever. But the current perception of this, client or of this climate or whatever, I think it has direct effects, which I'll just kind of like talk about those because they kind of already talk about the substance of everything, but I'll just talk about the direct effects that I've noticed, which is like, it's just like a hyper awareness of everything racial, right? Like everything racial. You're just like, I see that. Like, okay, I see you, white person. I see you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand what's going on here. It's like, but it's not like a feeling attacked, but it's just like an awareness. You're just like, yeah, certain things led to this and certain things led to this. And here we are. Like, we are a special organization because we go above and beyond to like educate our staff and do the things that we need to do to start dismantling that and get into where we need to be. But even considering that, it's still you can see it. We're victim to that. And it's not anyone's fault. We're all a part of it. But I think the main thing that I also noticed too was that there's been more accountability. There's been more call outs. There's been more responsibility. One thing that I noticed was that I'm not gonna say, oh, we would have never done this. That's exaggerated, but I noticed that it did happen, whereas it wasn't happening before, which was that we have Martell, who is I consider to be a Black leader in a leadership position at SPY, making decisions about things that really matter, bringing a perspective, a Black perspective to that room. So yeah, I think that's a direct effect of the current perception of the climate, of things that's going on, because I feel like there's almost this like white shock going on right now, which is like some cases it's fake, but then some cases I think it's really genuine, where it's like they were just been kind of sheltered and raised in this perfect kind of community out in the suburbs or whatever, and just have this like kind of like, oh, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know we did that. I didn't know that my ancestors did that or whatever. I didn't do anything, And so now they're just like, now they're saying like, oh, wow, we did do that. Okay, shit. So we are kind of perpetuating that. Oh, man. All right. And so, yeah, like I said, it's just more like a hyper awareness of everything.
Thank you. Final question for me, you guys. Start with Tanisha. In your opinion, what can agencies do to support their Black employees working in this field?
Um, I did have notes. I'll share from my personal my personal experiences at SPY. This has been like my first career-based job, and I'm 31. I've been surviving up until this point. And I feel like there has been a lot of opportunities for training, a lot of focus on wellness, and also um, some efforts to address equity. One thing I'm constantly talking about now is this opportunity that we had to engage with this organization called Free From. And it's opportunity based on financial wellness for those who survive gender-based violence, and are survivors in general. And one of the things that highlighted for me was, for the first time in my life, again, I'm 31 years old, I now have a place of stability. Mind you, my housing is based on my job. So if I lose my job, I lose but we're gonna get to that later. But I now have stability for the first time in my life, but I realized it's not enough to just have income. It's not enough to just be able to provide weekly. Like, we're talking about wealth. And things such as credit scores, things such as high yield savings account. And I think that we have to have equitable initiatives within organizations that are hiring Black folks, that are hiring people from disadvantaged or divested from communities or divested from backgrounds, to address those disparities and inequalities. Because as a Black woman, statistically, we are among the most educated, but we are the highest in debt, because we go to school to better ourselves, but then, you're bettering yourself, but then you exit school $40,000 worth of debt. So it's this never ending cycle. So I think organizations can work to support their Black employees by addressing the different disparities, which are all throughout all the lines. SPY has a wellness day that they gave us. They didn't have to do that, but it's an importance to focus on wellness. I have a supervisor who reminds me, like, your sick day isn't just if you're physically sick. If you show up to work, you know, when I found out that Daly, passed away, I couldn't think. And as someone who hasn't lost many people in my life, I didn't know how to properly grieve. But having coworkers, having supervisors who reminded me of the resources that are available to me, having things such as clinical supervision, which are spaces for us to decompress and also work as a team to communicate with one another, so that we're not operating in silos, so that we're not holding on to these things that affect us. The other day for work, I had to go to the grocery store. Something happened with one of our credit cards, and the credit card was declined. And the staff people at the grocery store were looking at me, and it had been a while since I felt that sense of, damn, they're looking down at me. They don't know that I'm here for work. They don't know, my circumstance, but just operating within that reality of, are they judging me because I'm Black? Are they judging me because they may think I am poor, but why are they judging me in all these different levels? And it's just operating within those things daily, showing up to work, and then having to put a smile on my face and be there to support you while I'm navigating these spaces. I think it's just important for organizations to be intentional about the folks that they're hiring. It's not just important to hire us, but it's also important to create these environments that scaffold our thriving and development. And that is wellness, that is, health, that is financial, that is addressing these, disparities that we face in our environment. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I think naming these systems, naming these opportunities goes a long way. And at SPY, I'm honored to be a co-chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, so that we can work on these initiatives, that we can work on being the change that we wish to see. And I know I said I was tired of Black people, or tired of us having to do all the work, but it also feels good to actually be included in an intentional way. And it is hard. Some days I feel like I can't show up because we've been in a pandemic for a whole year. I haven't been able to operate and use my own personal wellness and self-care tools that I usually do, such as going out, hanging with friends, and just having to operate within that while seeing social injustices play out. It's been very hard on my mental health. And so I think being in a space, working for an organization that addresses these things, yes, they may not have the immediate solution, but I think naming it and really offering those opportunities for equitable change are super important. And to just be self-reflective. Perfection isn't what we're striving for, but we should no longer be operating in a phase where we're not naming these things, when we're not talking about it and not working towards it, because then we're recreating the systems that we're talking about trying to change.
Thank you. Charles?
Yeah, so the question is, what can agencies do to support Black employees working in this field? And I think the first thing that comes to everyone's minds, obviously, is training, right? But I don't really like to think of training in this way, because when I think of training, I think of like it's a task or like an action that you're teaching someone. It's not really like a meaning or like a why you do it. It's like you teach a dog to sit when you say sit. You don't teach the dog to sit because if they cross the road right now, they're gonna get hit by a car. See what I'm saying? So like we need to get past like, oh, these are the things like the white allyship trainings that we used to have. These are the things you should do. These are the things you shouldn't do. And here's a kind of like immediate kind of small reason why you shouldn't do it. I don't really think that's going to get anywhere, because then you leave people confused and almost like, what is this? Because we're not dogs. We're smart. We can comprehend things. Like you can't just give us commands to say, oh, do this. Don't ask questions. Just do this. Don't say this to Black people. Don't talk about Black women's hair. Like that's just, I don't know. You're still going to have the thoughts in your mind, and you're just going to be kind of playing this game of like, oh, I don't want anyone to see me do this because I went to a training where they said, don't do that. Right. But if we got to get to something where, like, I don't know if it's a conversation, I don't know if it's a confrontation, like, an organized confrontation or what it is, but like, we look at other countries, like look at South Africa, right? Like with apartheid and all that shit that they had going on, they were forced to sit down and talk about that and confront it. And that's the only reason they got to the point where they could start moving past it. You see what I'm saying? So I'm not saying it's got to be something like that. Like we're all just going to have a big powwow. We're going to sit down and be like, you did this. But, just like kind of bringing that structure to a so-called meeting or training or whatever, where we can just sit down and be aware of it. Like, and not just say, do this, don't do this. It's like, this is why this needs to happen. This is why this needs to happen. So more like information sessions or more conversations, more discussions, where like open-ended conversations, you know what I mean? Because Black people are also not privy to this information a lot of times. A lot of Black people don't know what's going on. That was their main weapon against us throughout all time, was misinformation and the withholding of information. Because if we knew how to read the stars, you really think they could have kept us down there all that time? No, we'd have been out. What you mean? We'd have been gone. You know what I'm saying? So that's why they couldn't teach us nothing, because they know if we go to school and we get degrees, we learn how to start our own businesses and how to support each other, then shit's gonna get wild. So that's what I would say. We need to have more conversations about the root of the problem and stop throwing blame at dead people and start really thinking about what's going on right now and why we're doing it. How we can change things, yes, but why they need to be changed, why it's like it is, what actually happened. What is actually happening right now? Because I feel like it's just thrown around these general terms, and I a lot of the times don't understand what the hell people be talking about. So, but yeah, pass it to Martel with
that. Thank you, Charles, for that too. I know for me, really in that sense is, my mind goes everywhere as I'm like, I think about managing people and how do you manage folks and what does that look like and how do you set up goals and expectations? But utilize that in a way of saying like, I'm not setting up these goals to make you fail. I'm setting it up so we have a conversation about how do we reach those goals. So we have a conversation about, I'm going to coach you through those goals and provide you the development for that. And I think a lot of the time, you know, when we think of nonprofit, it's always like, all right, we just want to feed folks, we want to put folks into it, and we're going to get them there. We're going to hire Black folks, and we're going to put them into this work. But not once has anyone says like, okay, cool. Like as Charles was saying, like, all right, so are we going to talk about why this is important? Are we going to talk about why this is my role and like what this means into this work? I think, you know, we really got to start having ways of being intentional and strategic. So that way, if me as a Black, you know, I've been in lots of conversations in the beginning of my career where it was always like, okay, well, I need you to do this. And I'm like, okay, but that's what I did. Like, I did this because you said you wanted me to do this programming. So I did this programming. They're like, well, that's not the programming I wanted you to do. So, you know, here's a verbal warning because you're not doing what I need you to do. They're like, but you never told me what you wanted me to do. And I think, you know, as a Black employee, it's always like, oh, I don't know why we hired this person, or I don't know what that means. And I'm just like, you cannot ever tell someone they're not doing their job if you didn't tell them what their job was. If you didn't line it out and say, this is what I'm hoping we could accomplish. If you didn't go ahead. So I think one of those things we really have to start getting used to, which is, you know, we pull from, as I always say, you got to be interdisciplinary in your approach to your work. And like, if we pull from business, we don't need to recreate the entire business model because it doesn't work here. That's not what it is. But there are some components that provide successful reasons for folks to be able to exist and feel productive and feel useful and feel valued. Because if I'm like, okay, if I have a relationship with my staff member, I'm like, these are the goals that we're going to set up. Do we feel like we could accomplish this? Great. I know that our conversations are going to exist around that. And I'll also know at the end of the day, if you're not meeting them, then we're going to be able to name why that's not happening. And I'm going to support you in that process. So it's not about you're not doing what I told you to do. It's we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing because we should be having conversations about that. So I think that's, you know, one way of saying, like, how do we start setting up those systems so Black employees also have an idea of what that means? And they can say, you know, you're asking me to do this, but I don't have this information. I don't understand. This is Charles is speaking to. So I can say, great, let's go do some of these workshops, or let's look at this training, or let's have more conversations about this. Let's actually use our management time as like support, and like, let's utilize that to really dive deep into the work that we're doing. And I think at times we're really missing the point on like these different, you know, I'm studying business in that model because I'm like, there's so many beautiful things that they do in the business world that if we did that in the social service sector, like we're talking about really redeveloping the way that folks feel valued in their work, that folks feel productive. And like it clears up a lot of different challenges to just being able to go to work and just be able to be at work. So it's like, those are one of the things that I think is so valuable that will really contribute to how we even work with Black employees and train and develop and coach. And I think personally for me, just outside of that, is like naming things. Just as Tanisha said, just as Charles said, like if I'm in an organization and I'm in a Black employee and something big just happened in the Black community and we as doing pivotal work in the Black community, whether we see it or not, and we don't name those things, I'm just like, do we know that that has a huge impact in the work that we do? Like, you know, when George Floyd, all of it, when we talk about every Black person that has passed away due to something, I'm like, homelessness is critical, and police brutality, it's all a part of that pipeline that Tanisha shared in the beginning. So I'm like, if we're not naming these things, like to me, I'm just like, are we not naming it because we don't feel like we have the time? Because I'm like, this can be our member tomorrow. This can be one of your employees tomorrow. Like, I need to know that folks are seeing and hearing this. So I also know as we're navigating, this ain't a business to me. So I'm like, we're supposed to be human centered. So I'm like, if we are, then I need you to know that what you see is happening out there, I'm not the only person, because I do want to talk about it. I might not want to talk about it with you, but I do want to talk about it. And I need to know that in this space, I'm being valued and my identity is seen in reflection to what's happening in the outside world. So I say, yeah, I think one of the biggest things, as Tanisha mentioned, sometimes I don't want to do the work, but I also know like this the work, and I'm about to participate, and I'm going to participate in the ways that truly matter, because like I said, I do not want to see homelessness. And as far as I'm concerned, it might not happen in my lifetime, but I damn sure would do all that I can to at least decrease the amount of time it's going to take for homelessness to be able to not exist any further, or in the capacity that it exists today.
Well, that concludes our panel discussion. You all are powerful and Black excellence. Thank you again for joining, the
I
panel.
just want to say, thank you for allowing me to cut in, Brandon, that this work is not easy. So I think a lot of times we have these discussions and then it's like, all right, and go. All right, and go find the next Black person you could talk to and talk about, Black History Month and do what you got to do. But I think it's important to create empowering opportunities. So if you're interested in doing this work and really working towards change, now that a lot of new information has been brought into your mind, I think it's important to partner with the organizations that are doing this work. Take guidance from the folks who are doing this work. If you're interested in dismantling and working against systems of oppression when it comes to police brutality, look up Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. Look at the work that's being done. Look at the policies that we are supporting. Look at who our elected officials are. Partner with agencies such as Safe Place for Youth, who have a book club where this past month the book was Me and White Supremacy. So you don't have to go at this alone. There are communities that are doing the work. Partner with them, because it's something that you grow into, and like Charles was saying earlier, we're all operating within these systems of white supremacy, so we all have a role to play, and I think that role is accountability, but also restoration, looking at how we operate within these systems, but also how we all have a role to play in bringing about change. So really continue to support your local organizations. I'm uplifting SPY because I work for SPY, and I'm really excited about the initiatives that are coming up, and the opportunities for you to get involved in innovative change solutions such as host homes, where you can volunteer. If you have an extra bedroom, you can volunteer to open up your home, because it's not as easy as getting housing or affordable apartments, because there's so many systems and barriers in place, but we can support the innovative solutions that are coming online. So continue to support your local organizations and figure out how you can bring yourself forward in doing this work. That's it. I'm not gonna interrupt you no more.
But again, like I was saying, you guys are all amazing and inspiring and Black excellence. So now we're gonna just leave it open for questions in the chat room that you guys may have for the panel, and we'll go from there. Tanisha
I don't know
preaching,
if, right, I loved it. I know we got like 5 minutes left, Brandon. So I don't know if there'll be enough time for questions, but maybe we could end on a mic drop note, because I think Tanisha did a great job. Ended up mic drop.
That's the mic drop for Tanisha. Thank you all for joining us. Excited, and hope everyone comes next month. Thank you, guys.